talk to Kelly, especially about the ways in which she is not only building brand, but the ways in which she's applying performance metrics to that process. So let me please welcome Kelly Gillease, and being interviewed by our own Lisa Singer.
Hey, everybody.
Hello.
Well, Steve gave Kelly already a great introduction, so we're good there. But I do think it's interesting, just when I was looking at different, what you guys have been doing. And obviously, with the pandemic, a lot of people changed, shut down. But it was very important to you to keep things going, to have a presence and still invest. Before we even get started into what's happening now, why was that so key for you at that time?
Yeah, NerdWallet, for those of you who might not be familiar, is a personal finance company. And I think we're best known for having a lot of content nerds. We refer to everyone who works there as nerds, so I'm a marketing nerd. Content nerds who work tirelessly on really understanding the personal finance space for consumers and figuring out what is the best financial advice and guidance we could be giving to consumers around a whole variety of topics, pretty much anything in personal finance. And obviously, the COVID-19 pandemic was not only a big public health crisis, but a big financial crisis for many Americans as well. And in looking at that, as it began to unfold, kind of in the early 2020 time, we were really like, hey, we can take this investment we're making and we could really dial it back quite a lot. Or we could continue to invest in a smart way to really be there for consumers during this time with all this advice and information that they need. And if you remember back, there was a lot of things going on with the CARES Act, PPP loans, a lot of people trying to figure out how to file for unemployment who'd never done that. Just so many things going on financially that we felt like it was really important to address those things for consumers and be there for them, for our brand to be building that trust and those longer term relationships. So we really pivoted to create like a COVID hub of content. We had nerds reading the CARES Act and parsing it for people and saying, well, this is what this means for you as a consumer, and really just trying to show up in the best way we could to help people who needed it.
Yeah, and I want to get into that more because I do think that's definitely part of your strategy, being relevant to what's happening. But before we talk about strategy in terms of content, what in terms of channels are you making the most headway? Where are you seeing the best results?
Yeah, so areas that we've really expanded into more, starting back in 2020, we're looking at different ways that we could reach consumers who maybe like to learn in different ways or process information in different ways. So, our marketing plans originally, we were heavy on the printed word, lots of articles on NerdWallet, lots of things to read. And we were distributing that content through traditional content marketing channels like, social media, SEO, doing lots of work, in that vein, and then layering onto that performance and CRM and other things as well. And we really got into more over the past couple of years, developing a lot more alternative forms of content consumption for consumers and being where our consumers want to be. So a lot of them are on YouTube, looking at content to learn on that channel. So we've produced a lot more YouTube videos, which we have a slide for and we'll talk about in a little bit. We've also produced a podcast in that time. So we have the Smart Money podcast, which we'll talk about a little bit more too. But those are ways where we felt like if we really want to be omni-channel everywhere people are trying to learn about personal finance, those are places we need to be, in addition to expanding into things like TikTok, which everybody's testing, Instagram, all those social places we have been and are continuing to grow into. We felt like expanding our content into these new areas was also important.
Were you coming up with, obviously you're testing all these channels, and I love TikTok now because when I first started with MediaPost, everyone wanted something on TikTok, but no one would speak to it because no one was actually doing it. So that's like a little over 2 years ago. So it's great to see you guys are. But what were the biggest challenges when you were trying to, do all of these new channels, trying to reach consumers? What were you facing in terms of the hardest part of that?
Yeah, I think the hardest part for us is the hardest part for probably any advertiser being in this room, which is just a lot of uncertainty going on around us. You know, there's still a lot of economic volatility, volatility related to the pandemic, and being able to weather that. And you know, we're a consumer-first, mission-driven company who wants to provide clarity for all of life's financial decisions. And you know, in trying to do that in a very uncertain environment means, you know, you've got to be nimble, you've got to be able to pivot, and just the challenge ongoing for us as humans and the people trying to work and do our jobs, but also the challenge as marketers into how do we stay on top of what's going on, where do we need to change, how do we build nimbler plans, like all of that has been probably the biggest challenges.
Yeah, and Steve alluded to earlier on when he was talking about the survey results. OTT became a big part of what you were doing, and actually it had been something you were already investing in, but even, I think, more so as things progressed. Talk about that. What does your OTT strategy look like?
Yeah, I'm trying to pull up the slide here. Oh, hold on. I think our AV guys are helping me out here.
Is that you and your vacation?
I wish. Later this week, I'm going to Hawaii, so it will be. One thing that happened during the pandemic in early 2020, which this slide's only showing you OTT impression availability from May of 21, actually. But if you go back even further to May of 20, there was an 80% increase of OTT inventory. So this chart was like 80% less at the start of the pandemic, and now you can see it's growing to be even more. Just OTT has really taken off, which if you think about your own habits, probably everyone in this room during the pandemic started streaming a bit more or maybe cut the cord, and there's just huge opportunity here. And as we think about being omnichannel and where our consumers want to be, this is a huge area where consumers are, and so we needed to think about investing more here. We've long been investing in OTT as a business, but thinking about, you know, how do we take advantage of this unprecedented growth in OTT for NerdWallet, and invested more there and invested early on new platforms like Peacock. We were one of the early investors on Premier League football on Peacock, and then also on HBO's new ad-supported platform. We were a really early investor there. And I think having that advantage of being kind of a new advertiser on those platforms has helped us to reach new audiences, be where consumers are going, and it's been a really important part of our strategy.
Well, and talk about that in terms of your mix and where you're finding, you know, you obviously doing more OTT, but how are you spreading it out? Like what channels are you finding that are working better for you? Is social a big part of that mix?
Yeah. You know, we have different strategies for different channels. So, you know, we've had some of our marketing more geared towards brand and expanding our awareness and our reach. We've had some of our marketing more geared towards performance metrics. OTT is definitely on both those buckets, right? There's an aspect of it we run that's very performance oriented, and we're not really targeting as much based on our ideal audiences or who we're trying to elevate brand awareness for. We're thinking about it more from the perspective of what's going to drive the best ROI for our business, and we're trying to take advantage of the impressions there in that way. And then we have a more strategic branded side where if you've seen us sponsoring things like Man in the Arena, we were one of like the 4 sponsors for that, or some big streaming sports events. Those are things where we're being a lot more choiceful around trying to reach and elevate NerdWallet's brand.
In terms of, you talk about ROI, obviously that's a key metric for you, but how else are you measuring it? What are you really looking for?
Yeah, so on the brand side, we're really looking at many traditional brand metrics. You know, our goal is to be the brand of choice for personal finance, and so we want to really be more ubiquitous there, more top of mind in the personal finance space. And we used to say, for all your money questions, turn to the nerds. And I think we still think about that a lot as kind of a rallying cry for our marketing. And so we look at things like, you know, aided awareness, unaided awareness, share of voice, I think very traditional brand metrics you would look at, direct traffic coming to our site, homepage visits, app downloads, things like that. But then we also are looking at a media mix model, and this is where we're looking at really more the ROI and incrementality of our brand campaigns to our business in the quarter we're running them. and thinking about, okay, how does this really move the needle in our business? How can we be smarter directionally about where we're investing in these different brand channels as well? And that helps us, I think, to hold some more accountability around brand spend and make it not such a black box for the business. And that's been really important for us as a more, traditional tech company. That's a struggle for figuring out how to invest in brand, and this has really helped people like our CEO and others feel comfortable with it, because there are these metrics and data for them to understand about how our brand is performing.
Are you finding that, because I know talking with so many people, it's obviously flexibility is so key here. Are you able to work with that still appeal to the higher ups to say, okay, we're going to be doing this, even if it's maybe something that's a little different or not what they're used to?
Yeah, a value we have at NerdWallet is informed risk-taking, and I like that one a lot when we're talking about our brand spend, because some of it does feel a little uncomfortable and is a little bit different than how we've done things, but I think in the spirit of testing, learning, taking informed risk to move our business forward, we've been able to make a case to make it feel more comfortable, and having really clear kind of goals and metrics we're going to hold ourselves accountable to as a business, I think has really helped also in terms of getting everyone aligned around what we want to test here and how we want to go forward. Part of our ad spend is not as flexible when you do a big brand campaign as things like performance are, but part of it still is. And so we're really communicating a lot around what's flexible, what's not as flexible, and being clear about how we can still have a lot of flexibility as a business should unprecedented things continue to happen.
I want to touch on when you first were starting talking, and you were saying how you really leaned into what was happening with COVID, and we wanted to be there as a source for consumers. So talk about that and how your messaging has adapted in terms of what was resonating with consumers, not only then, but now as we're moving out of COVID, hopefully for good.
Yeah. I have some visuals up here of our Compare Your Way There campaign, which is the current campaign we're running for NerdWallet. And a lot of the messaging we're running now as we're emerging out of the pandemic time has a lot to do with kind of where consumers are in terms of their personal finances and the things they've kind of put on hold that maybe weren't possible to do, like travel during the pandemic, or they were not considering doing. So with the availability now of like remote work, a lot of people before weren't thinking about buying a house if you lived in San Francisco, where I live, and it's very expensive, right? But if you have the chance to relocate, maybe that does become a goal for you. And so we really wanted to explore the things that consumers were very focused on coming out of this time. And some of those things aren't surprising. They're things consumers have been focused on: paying down debt, building wealth, how to invest, how to maybe save and buy a house, how to have great travel experiences. And some of those things were maybe new to those consumers, like thinking about where they were living more. And so we really wanted to focus on what consumer priorities are in terms of, again, being consumer first, being aligned to what our consumers are thinking about, and how could we address that and show how NerdWallet's Compare Your Way There can help them unlock those dreams and access those personal finance products. Everyone wants to be smart about their finances. Everyone wants to be informed, make great financial decisions. And I think that's something where NerdWallet has long had that as like our core value prop to consumers, that we have this expert, unbiased guidance to offer. And we wanted that to come through in terms of, we can help you find the right products to make these dreams a reality for you. And we get where you are coming out of this time, and we can help you with it.
Well, and part of that guidance is coming through your podcast, which I know does very well, but talk about that and how you're leveraging it and what the plans are moving forward.
Yeah, let me go forward here to the podcast. So we have the Smart Money podcast, which we started, Sean started as kind of a 10% project. So he's on our content team. And he kind of was like, oh, I love podcasts. I'd love to start a podcast. And we said, great, let's help you think about through the content marketing for that and how we would get eyeballs on it for you. And he started doing this as kind of a passion project, and it quickly became pretty popular, actually. And it's in the top 5% of podcasts downloaded after 30 days. So it's really picked up a lot of steam. They've really evolved it from being kind of a 10% time project into its own program, where we're driving a lot of engagement We're thinking a lot about the content we're putting in this podcast in terms of having deep dives on things like investing and really like having deep education about that, but also answering questions from our audience. So they'll often do a podcast where they talk about this week in your money, like here's the things you need to know with what's going on. So if you think about in the last week, there's been a lot about inflation, the Fed rate changes, I mean, all these things that are happening, we address on the podcast kind of in real time, and then answering money questions that come. Sometimes they've expanded into having guests come, so authors, other financial advice professionals, influencers, and that's really helped amp up the diversity of voices on our podcast, which is something we really care about at NerdWallet. So we've been able to bring on lots of different people with expertise from different backgrounds, which is great. And it's something that really drives a lot of engagement. We found that when we surveyed listeners of the podcast, 90% of them said they had to use NerdWallet or they were going to use NerdWallet based on listening to the podcast. They found it so valuable, and we're continuing to subscribe. So as an ongoing engagement tool with our brand, we found it to be really useful. We've actually gotten requests to advertise on our podcast, and we've said no, we don't have any advertising on it, other than for NerdWallet. But we don't even really do host reads or anything like that. We're just sort of saying like, hey, we're from NerdWallet, and here's like what we have to say about personal finance this week. And so it's been really great. I think.
That's awesome. And I think which we talked about earlier. You don't shy away from, many brands can shy away from maybe what's in the news, but that's definitely, and I think it aligns with the podcast and also what we were talking about in terms of your messaging. Talk about the differences you've seen when you have leaned into what's actually happening and when you really, do something on that.
Yeah, so in terms of in the news, we actually have a program we call Breaking News that we started during the pandemic because there's so much happening all the time. And we really wanted to be in front of it with consumers and think about how we could help them like in the moment about the personal finance questions they had. So, one thing we've done is develop this program where we've got writers on the content team who are actively looking at, all right, what's happening this week? What is the personal finance take on that if there is one? And, how could we then quickly have a response to it to share and help consumers? And we distribute that through our content marketing, through CRM, the podcast will address it. Like there's a lot of avenues where we kind of distribute out that information once we have it. But like our breaking news emails are some of our highest engagement emails we send. Some of them have click-through rates north of 60%. Like that's incredible, right? And we're really leaning into thinking about how do we drive this engagement and repeat through offering a lot of value in the content we have to consumers and putting out something that people want to engage with and read. And so I think that's a big part of us leaning into the news. It's obviously very impactful for people's personal finance. Student loan forbearance is a great example of this, right? Keeps getting extended. What's going on with it? People want to stay up on it. Many, many people who use NerdWallet have student loans, so it's something where we want to always be on top of what's going on there.
So when you are, putting together your messaging and really working on staying on top of these news stories, is there ever a question in terms of where are you going to invest in? Like what areas, like what even channels, do you want to risk being part of CNN's, news when there might be some negative things going on, or even when people are worrying about, all the crazy content. I mean, we are dealing with that so much these past couple of years, and we're still continuing to do that. Does that come into play?
Yeah, I think it does, and we always want to be really like respectful and thoughtful about where we're showing up. And so we have done at times, like sort of the breakout with events in the Ukraine, we have chosen to not be present for a little while to give space and time to those things and be respectful. But I think generally, for us, it's less about concerns of brand alignment because a lot of things in personal finance are very personal, can be awkward, are dramatic sometimes when you think about the pandemic. And so I think we don't want to shy away from really addressing things either. And we actually have a series on YouTube. We've extended our content a lot into YouTube, and this is a little grab of that. But we have a series called Awkward Money Questions that's actually about really awkward money questions. So like, I'm getting divorced, like is like one of the videos. How to talk to your partner that you're gonna move in with about finances and how are you gonna divide up your finances. If you're trying to buy a house and you're not married, like what does that mean? What discussion should you have? So there's a lot of questions, people who feel ashamed about debt, like how to talk about that and work through it. There's a lot of things that are uncomfortable in personal finance, and we try to make them more comfortable, and something that we are always optimistic as a brand about consumers' ability to deal with their finances. Anyone can do this, and we want people to feel very empowered and informed. And so we can't shy away from hard things. When that's the case. And so we really think about it more as what is appropriate and respectful and how can we help.
And the tone, though, because as you said, you're not shying away from the difficult conversations, but you do keep it a little bit more fun or light or in many ways. Is that purposeful just because it is such a uncomfortable subject?
I think we try not to be wacky or inappropriate or too fun, because these are serious matters for people in personal finance. But we also want to be optimistic. Like if you're too depressing about it, people don't think they can do it, right? And so we want consumers to feel really empowered, and we do take a tone of like, you've got this, and like, you can do this, and if you need help, here's how you get help, and a little more a little bit of being like clever and tongue-in-cheek about things, but we really try to be very, very positive about it.
Yeah, it's definitely seen. And also, you just were talking YouTube, but we started off with the OTT and what you're doing so much of. And can you tell me, because that was something that you were always investing in, but as you said, you've been doing it even more so. Were there things that you learned or how you're now working and doing OTT that is even that much better for you? Because we even talked about you weren't even concerned with the costs going up because it is something that has always been a part of your DNA. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think because there's so much inventory in OTT, I don't think we've seen as dramatic a change in costs there because there's just so much availability relative to other areas where, like in television, that's shrinking. It's not going to be a surprise to anyone, and costs are going up a lot because just supply and demand, and I think that's a little bit less of that dynamic on OTT. I'm a recovering economist. I used to be an economist for the Department of Labor, so I say things like supply and demand like a lot. So I think for us, it's figuring out what is efficient and where are those efficient pockets for us in that channel, or where is it going to resonate and have the right impact on our brand metrics, where we are willing to pay a little bit more for something because we know that's going to really accelerate our brand. And we could see spikes related to some of the more premium OTT we bought on our business and on our traffic at NerdWallet, particularly around some of the football playoffs we had right kind of before New Year's. And so we could see, hey, this is really like having an impact and is worth it more than maybe buying a bunch of more remnant or cheaper inventory for our brand metrics.
Right. Well, before we do open up so people have questions, I like to sort of finish things off in terms of what are you most excited about now? Like, what did you learn, or maybe what didn't work that you're very excited to move forward with as you go into the new year or even just the next few months?
Yeah, in terms of what has and has not worked, I think the things that we are conscious of is trying to keep flexible. I would really like some precedented times instead of some unprecedented times. I think everyone's kind of tired of hearing that. And so I think we're thinking a lot about like, how do we pivot well, continue to meet consumers' needs, and be there for consumers. So we're building that lifetime relationship with them, not a transactional relationship in our business. And we really want to continue to show up in that way and invest in things that help us do that as a business, like a lot of these content initiatives. And the things I'm excited for are Breaking News, which I mentioned, which is a newer program we have, but something we're looking to extend and continue to grow. And there's a lot going on there. Like right now, we're addressing a lot of what does the Ukraine mean for your finances here in the US? And there's actually quite a lot of impact for consumers to that. So we want to be proactively addressing those things. And then the second thing I'm excited for is from a brand perspective, we've not done a lot of brand activations as a business. We've done more traditional kind of brand advertising. And as we think about personal finance being a little bit of a crowded space and a commoditized space, how can we stand out and drive a little more preference and love for NerdWallet? And we do think some of these activations or interesting partnerships we could be doing could help us to differentiate a little bit more. So we're excited to get that off the ground and do more there. I think there's been some really interesting things I've seen more traditional brands do, like Levi's has done some interesting things with TikTok, and they're like a really old company. So I think there's some interesting things we could do to kind of make our brand more relevant, continue to try to differentiate.
Great.
Do we have questions? Raise your hand, I'll get the mic to you. Wave your hand so I can easily see it.
Hi, this is Jenna with Clorox. How you guys respond to what is going on? Can you hear me?
Well, it was on.
It's on now. I'll shout. How you guys respond to topics in the media is very impressive. How do you guys execute quickly? Is the content team in-house, and what is your typical turnaround time for the various pieces of content that you guys deploy?
Yeah, so our content team is in-house. They're all NerdWallet employees, and so people are connected to each other really easily between like our CRM team, our content team, our comms team, our content marketing team, all those folks, very tight kind of first team together to move quickly. We also have a great partnership with our legal team to get things turned around quickly because we're in personal finance, which is a heavily regulated space. So we want to make sure we're not breaking any rules with anything we're doing. Most of our content has editorial protection and First Amendment rights, so it's not a lot we have to clear there, but we always want to make sure we're doing right legally. And so we shoot for being very reactive quickly within like a day. 2 days tops for like a lot of this stuff, turning it around. And really that means you just have to have people's priorities align well. So we know breaking news is a program we want to support. We know it's important. So if something comes up, like this is the priority for people, and other things might have to wait a little bit, or we've carved out that time in people's work to be able to accommodate it. And so we can be very reactive to these things.
Kelly, I have a couple of quick questions. Drafting off of my conversation with Steve from Experian yesterday, how do you define your competitive set, and how do you come at the problem of differentiation within it?
Yeah, NerdWallet is all over personal finance, and I think depending on which consumer you ask, they will say a lot of different things about who our competitors are, depending on what experience they've had with us, right? We have a lot of great informative content, so when you think about other great informative personal finance content sites, like we would be competing with them. Some people are viewing us as a great place to track and monitor their credit score and personal finances. There's a lot of different apps and services for that. Some of us view us as a great place to shop and find financial products like credit cards, bank accounts, things like that. There's plenty of providers in those spaces as well. There's a lot of neobanks and other fintechs that, depending on your understanding of the space, you may think NerdWallet is in those spaces too. So I think there's a lot of areas that we kind of can map to as a business. And I think about it a lot more in consumers' minds than what we think at NerdWallet, because what we think kind of doesn't matter. What matters is what consumers think.
And how are you differentiating? Yeah. What do you think your main points of differentiation, understanding that they are besieged by a lot of different brands coming at them from a lot of different directions?
Yeah, I think our number one differentiator is the trust we build through having unbiased financial guidance and expert editorial advice. Like that is something we have over 100 content nerds working on that we are always putting front and center, and they're editorially independent from the rest of the business. So we think about that as being the thing that we offer that no one else does in the space, and really looking consumer first in our business.
Okay, so let me connect the dots, because one of the things that you're big at and good at is performance marketing, and yet you're employing 100 content providers. How do you square that circle in terms of what is the performance of content? Content is one of the most costly things for a brand to produce, and yet calculating the ROI is among the most difficult. So how do you do it? What equation are you using to know that you're making the right investment?
Yeah, our content team does a great job of supporting SEO. also for us. And that's a huge business for NerdWallet, and the primary business NerdWallet was in for many years before we added in other areas of marketing. So, the return on that is very high when we look at it. And we kind of view the investment that way, in terms of it's worth doing because we have a large organic business that they support. And then these other programs, like our content marketing programs and breaking news and things like that, are additional kind of icing on that cake, and we can make business cases for those as well.
That's an interesting way of coming at it, using SEO as sort of the proxy for ROI, for content. Kelly, that was great. Lisa, Kelly, thank you so much.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
thanks for having
Kelly.
me.